If you've ever wondered whether you can actually keep running, not just for this season, but for the rest of your life, I want you to meet someone who has spent years asking the world's best athletes, coaches, and researchers that exact same question. I'm here today with Jonathan Levitt. John is a Boulder based runner and host of For the Long Run podcast, which is a podcast built around long form conversations with elite athletes, coaches, and researchers, all focused on one central question: what actually enables sustainable excellence? And through his podcast network, John is reaching over 850,000 listeners every single month. So, when it comes to understanding what separates runners who keep going strong into their 50s, 60s, and beyond from those that keep breaking down, John has access to that kind of conversation that not most of us will get the chance to have. And as a running physical therapist and coach, I've worked with hundreds of runners who are at that exact crossroads. They love running, and they're not ready to give it up yet, but something keeps getting in the way, whether it's an injury that just won't heal, a training plan that is beating them down instead of building them up, or just that voice in the back of their head saying, maybe I'm getting too old for this. Can you guys relate to this at all? Because I hear it constantly, and I'm here to tell you that voice is wrong. And John's research into sustainable excellence is going to show you exactly why. So, in today's conversation, we're going to get into the biggest mistakes masters runners make, how your training needs to evolve after 40, and what the runners who are still going strong for life are doing differently. This is going to be a good one. John, welcome to the Healthy Runner podcast. So excited to have you here today.
Dwayne, thanks so much for having me on. That was quite an intro, and I've got a lot to live up to here.
Well, I know you're going to deliver. I've had the pleasure, guys, of meeting John in person, actually. He was moderating a panel at the Boston Marathon Expo this past year. And I'm excited to actually bring all of your knowledge and wisdom, John, right here to our audience and really kind of diving right in. Like, you've built an entire podcast around sustainable excellence. Like, what does that phrase actually mean to you? And why does it matter even more once a runner crosses into their 40s and beyond?
Yeah, so I have access to a lot of elite and professional athletes through my work, through living in Boulder and whatnot. And I started asking questions to these athletes as I was going down the rabbit hole of learning about ultra running in particular. And I was curious how and more importantly, why people do this and what enables them to run 100 miles or run a marathon, in the 2 hour range or whatever it is. And there are so many commonalities in the stories, and the people are going about things in different ways. But ultimately, like, I put out 421 podcast episodes, and if I could synthesize all of it into one or two sentences in terms of like what is the one trait or one qualifier of a runner being able to be a quote unquote successful or happy runner? It's joy. Like, you have to like what you're doing, you have to love what you're doing, you have to know why you're doing it. And if those things are true, you'll just figure it out. And you'll be able to run faster, you'll be able to run further, and even if you're not running faster or further, the doing of the thing becomes more joyous, if you understand why you're doing it, and if you have a good reason for why you're doing it, right? So, I got into running in 2014, 2013. I was, like, 23 years old. I thought that to be a good runner, I needed to break 3 hours in the marathon, and everything else didn't really matter. And I wasn't really enjoying it. I raced 4 or 5 marathons, and I didn't break 3 hours. One of those, I didn't even break 4 hours, in the pursuit of breaking 3, and I didn't really learn anything. And then I kinda shifted the whole mindset, and I had started listening to podcasts. I'd started connecting with some of these excellent athletes. I hadn't launched my own podcast yet, though that did happen the year that I broke 3 for the first time and only time. Um, and it just shifted the focus away from the metrics and the numbers to, do you like doing this thing? What about it is fun? Why are you doing it? And what is your motivation for getting out of a warm, cozy bed early in the morning when you could sleep another hour, 2 hours instead? Um, and what fuels you? And when those questions are answered, the dynamic has changed dramatically. And so I think becoming a masters athlete or getting into your 50s or 60s, like those things are even more important. And perhaps the reason for, or your why behind running, shifts from a competitive, like, I wanna break this time, to, um, this is good for me and good for my physical and mental health, and will enable me to be on this planet for longer in a higher quality condition. And so I turned 35 last year, and I don't know, I wanna do this for another 30 no, 40 years, at least. Like, I see people out there that are 80 years old that are still running, and, they're certainly a whole lot slower than they were, 40 years ago, but, like, I remember so vividly, it was February of 2021, I was out in Ouray, Colorado, so, like, 8,000 feet. It's in the winter, it's snowing, and there was a couple, a man and a woman, running uphill in the snow. I was like, "These guys could be my grandparents," and they're out there doing this thing, and they're probably just out there living life and loving life, and that's what I aspire to do. And so for me, the doing of the thing is the facilitation of joy and doing it with friends, doing it with community, and being able to have these adventures, and, like, I wanna do that for decades to come.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, that core central theme of running with joy. And we've talked about that many times on this show before, how things really start to unlock and change when you are running with joy. And it's interesting that you mentioned, determining your why. And that's actually an exercise that we have within our Healthy Runner Academy. Is we have our members go through that exercise in the beginning to really get the mindset around, what is that why, and why are we doing what we're doing, and why are we waking up so early, right, to go on those runs on like a random, Tuesday morning when it's like cold outside and you don't want to go. Yeah, I think that is so central, that you do have to have a good understanding of really what makes you tick, and what is your why. And a lot of times that can change, right, in seasons of life, different goals. And that is interesting, that was kind of the core thing that you have, thought about in all of the interviews that you have done, that people have come back to that theme of like running with joy and having that like strong why, and have that like foundation first, which everything else is going to be built upon. And yeah, congrats to you on, getting that sub 3 eventually. I'm sure you learned a lot during that process. And it also allowed you to pivot into like something. I know now your core love is like trail running, and doing ultras. But you mentioned you're 35, so you're technically not a masters runner. I always think it's like interesting when you hit 40, it's like you're a masters runner. I'm like, whoever came up with that term anyway? What are we a master of? But you are in your mid 30s, and you're training in Boulder. And like, what's the biggest thing that you've like personally had to unlearn or change about how you train? As you mentioned, being like a 4+ hour marathoner to actually getting sub 3, going into ultras, as you have aged into your kind of mid 30s.
Yeah, no, I wanna go back a few sentences and add a little commentary and add some examples to it. So, we talked about joy and fun and these types of things, and I don't wanna paint the picture of, like, it's like a floofy thing and you just have to be prancing around all the time, like, loving life. Like, you can still be super competitive. People that come to mind that clearly, like, exude joy and are serious athletes, I think of, Sarah Hall, I think of Jess McClain, I think of Des Linden. Um, on the men's side, like Hayden Hawks on the trail side. Um, like these people clearly are having fun, and they're also like really serious athletes and taking their athletics seriously, and either winning races or competing in ways that they haven't before in their career, like Molly Seidel or Des Linden, are both doing right now. And so I don't want to paint the picture that like performance and joy are two separate things. Like you can have both of those. I think Molly is the perfect example of she wasn't having fun racing road marathons. And she hasn't run a successful road marathon in a couple of years, yet put her on a trail start line and she's been just absolutely crushing, and she's like, this has changed my life. And I wonder if, in a year from now she'll take a stab at another marathon, and the fact that she'll have run 100K and 100 miles really puts the 2.5 hours of running a marathon into perspective for her, because that's what it did for me with doing a 50K and then going back to the marathon. So just to like check the box of you can do both, you can have joy and you can be a very serious performing athlete at the same time, whatever serious performance means for you. But to answer your question that you asked now minutes ago, what is the one thing I had to unlearn? It's the reliance on the clock and the times, and letting like vibes drive more often. I work with David Roche, and he's my coach. He's been my coach for like 8 years now, and he works with a handful of these athletes. Jess McClain is one of his athletes. She took a break because she wasn't enjoying running during the pandemic, and she came back and just ran what 2:20 at Boston, and has just absolutely dominated everything lately, and is clearly having fun. So my framework for answering these types of questions is by having my own lived experience and then watching what athletes in my orbit are doing as well. And so someone like Jess or others have talked about the over reliance on metrics, and how when you back off of that, you can really uncover what your potential is. And so David talks about like we often hear like the gray zone of moderate effort. It's not easy, it's not hard, and people think that this is bad. Um, David has changed his tune, and he said like when you feel good, you're welcome and suggested to run in the gray zone if it feels good, right? And so for me, that's the like 7:30 to 7:15 easy quote unquote effort, which is if you do 8 miles or 10 miles at like I call it the Chipotle effort, fast casual. Like that's my favorite pace. That's my favorite effort when it feels good. It brings so much joy to just be like, oh, I feel good today. I'm gonna like kick it up 20 to 30 seconds a mile, but not with much intentionality, and just like let it roll. And I have like 2 or 3 of those runs a month, and for me, that's a signal of things are trending in the right direction, both from a fitness standpoint, but also from like a mental standpoint of like the fire is burning versus the pace is XYZ. Like today, I needed to run a time qualifier to get myself into a seated wave of Boulder Boulder. Boulder Boulder has like 100 waves and 27 of them are seated. And so I wanted to be somewhere near people running my race pace, and not people who were like I didn't want to be running 6:10 pace next to people who are walking. It's like dangerous, and it doesn't facilitate a good race. So I drove out to a group run, and I ran a few miles with people, and I ran a 5K. And on the way there I was like, bumping along to the music, and like the vibes were high. And for me that's a signal that the metrics are all good. And I know that when I'm having that feeling consistently, like my testosterone is high, and my iron is good, and my sleep is good, and the H like I'm at the point like I did 50 blood tests with Inside Tracker over my 10 years of working there. So like I know what 800 testosterone feels like. I know what 1,000 feels like. I know what 500 feels like. And I can at this point, I can, like, tell you probably within a 20% margin of error, like, what my testosterone level is, and the, like, readiness that I have to perform. And so I took a test 2 weeks ago, and I was like, "I feel like I'm really good right now," and it was like 800 something, which is great for a 35-year-old. It's great for a 25-year-old. When I was 25, it was 1,100. So, but, like, I felt like a monster at that time, and it's, like, totally clean, like, I wasn't doping or anything. And so I've moved away from this reliance on the metrics to tell me I'm feeling good, and more so use the metrics as, like, check-ins to make sure my perception of feeling is still right and accurate. And so I know I don't need my watch to tell me that today is a good day to perform. I don't need a testosterone score of 850 to tell me I'm ready to race. Like, I have gotten to a point where I intuitively know these things, and it sounds crazy to say, but, like, I've done the data collection enough times that I don't need to do the data collection at this point. And it's so freeing, to not be tied to it, both from, like, the blood values and the watch values and the metrics and the paces and the times. And what that unlocks is, like, the freedom to just perform and do the thing and recover well and all of that. So, yeah, and then the obvious other, like, easy thing to say about unlearning is, like, diet culture. Like, I used to be so rigid with what I eat and whatnot, and, like, I did paleo and I did low carb and all these things that, like, people think work, but they work because some people are massive outliers and they're very noisy. Um, Outliers are noisy. And so outliers are good storytellers because they've got a good story to tell. And so you hear someone that's like, "I only eat this and I only eat meat or I only eat vegan," or whatever. And the majority of us are not outliers. Like, statistically, that's how it works. We all need on average 7 to 8 hours of sleep and more carbs than we're currently eating. And so moving away from, like, this extreme, you like, your plate needs to look like this versus, like, to be a good runner, you probably should eat more and you probably should eat more carbs. Um, and most dietitians will say those things, and most doctors who know anything about running will also sports med physicians will also say those things. And so I don't want to say that as, like, a blanket statement, but I did a podcast with Dr. Teddy Bross, who's he's a concierge doctor here in Boulder, and he cited some data that was like 40% of women are underfueled and 48% of men, or 44% are underfueled in a population that was studied. So that's, like, almost half of the people listening. So let's say you have a running friend. There's a good chance that one of you is probably not eating enough. And so for me, like, unlearning the best runners are skinny runners and this and all that crap, like, you gotta eat, you gotta be strong, and you gotta not rely on the metrics and be more intuitive and aware, like, self-aware, and that just comes through experience.
Yeah, those are phenomenal points to make, and just being in tune to how your body is responding to the training in your running journey. I think, yeah, there's a lot of value to that, and there's definitely, certainly value in making sure that we are getting enough carbs and getting proper nutrition to not only serve from performance standpoint, but also like recovery for like a lot of the injured runners that I see. We do know that that is a contributory factor to a lot of running related injuries, is just that underfueling component. So I'm glad that you had mentioned that. Yeah, I think back to early in my running journey, same kind of similar, situation to you, where yeah, it was all about the low carb, movement and running fasted because you're going to burn more fat. And, those are the things that, we told ourselves. And it's certainly one of the things, like we have a registered dietitian on our team, Brooke, who shared many times on the podcast the benefits of making sure our bodies are properly fueled. So I'm glad that is one of the lessons that you've had to unlearn as well in your running journey. And after hundreds of conversations with athletes and researchers, coaches, what would you say is, I know it's going to be hard, probably one, but the number one mistake you see masters runners make when it comes to training longevity?
Yeah, the one mistake, it's really hard to boil it down to one, but I think it comes down to the things that facilitate under recovery. So it's sleep, it's fueling, it's not enough strength training, which I'm certainly guilty of. But these are the things that make it hard to continue, and they contribute to injury, they contribute to burnout, and they contribute to impacting other parts of life, which then causes enough friction that you're like, I should stop running for 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever. And so I really think that I, I heard again David say something to the effect of like, it's really hard to actually overtrain. It's just really easy to under recover. And so the majority of people are capable of so much more than they think if they fuel the training and if they fuel the recovery. But most people aren't doing that, and they're not sleeping enough, they're not eating enough, and these are the contributing factors to injury and burnout and like not feeling good. And so, yeah, to answer your question, it's the things that facilitate poor recovery.
That's phenomenal because, and I would add to that, like those are the things usually we can get away with in our 20s, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
once we are, 40 plus, that's when we start to really see the consequences of not, really dedicating the value or the time into those recovery tools that you speak of.
Particularly women, because testosterone is such a protective mechanism against overtraining, against injury, against all like burnout. And obviously, women have a much lower baseline of testosterone, but it's such an aid in masking these types of things. So yeah, it's even more impactful for women.
Yeah, no, great point. And in terms of like mindset shift, in your experience, like what's the biggest mental or identity shift a runner has to make when they are transitioning from this mindset of like getting faster, which, most of us early in our running journey, like that's our focus, getting faster, to like actually running for life now? And how do the best masters runners navigate that?
Yeah, it's flexibility. It's like shifting the goals, right? So you look at Des Linden, she's not going to win Boston again, most likely. Sorry, Des, but I think you'd agree. But she can do Marathon des Sai, a 5-day, 150-mile adventure in the Moroccan desert, right? Like these are brand new challenges that set new baselines. And so again, someone like her, someone like Sarah Hall, who will um do trail racing this year. Um, it's finding new things to fire you up, or like Kara Goucher, she has figured out how to set new goals. Like a 19-minute 5K for Kara right now is like what she's chasing. And Kara used to run marathons faster than that pace. So it's all about how do you how do you not compare yourself to the previous version of yourself? I'll cite another example. I asked Gwen Jorgensen, who is an Olympic gold medalist, a couple of years ago as she was getting back after having Stanley, her first child. She was coming in like sixth place in like local sprint and Olympic triathlons here in Boulder, and just like moms of like random moms of Boulder were beating her. And I was like, how do you sit with that? Like you were the best in the world, for a period of time. 4 years she was the reigning Olympic champion in triathlon, and then was getting beat by amateurs at, Thursday night triathlons. And she was like, "Well, I don't compare myself to the previous version of myself because my life context was totally different. I can only achieve the best version of myself in this moment, in this period of life." And I share all these names because it gives credibility to it gives like gusto behind the statement. Like it'd be one thing if it were right. So like this person was able to achieve the pinnacle of sport, and she's also able to feel this way and reposition her thoughts to be like, how can I be the best version of Gwen of 2026 or 2025 or 2027, whatever it is. And so to hear an Olympic champion feel that way, I don't know, it makes me as a 35-year-old professional amateur, feel great about my ability to do exactly the same thing. Like, if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me.
Right, right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, just focusing on different phases of life, right? And we all do, to a certain extent. And I do find that it is more those runners who aren't able to run with joy, where they are constantly comparing themselves to their 20-year younger self, or
Right.
wanting to hit pieces that they used to run, or wanting to complete workouts they used to do, mileage, whatever it is, time on clocks, stuff like that. So, yeah, like, and what Des did in the desert, and then coming back the next weekend and still like running, I think what all of us would say is like really fast in Boston when she's kind of like
Right.
not trying
And drank a beer during it.
is like amazing. But yeah, having those different goals and different mindset, as you embark on like a new chapter of running, or at a different kind of life point, or we see a lot of runners who maybe aren't running like they used to during childbearing ages, right? And they have young babies and kids, and it's like they're just getting in runs whenever they can, and that's what it is for a couple of years, and then they maybe want to get back into actually training for a half marathon or a marathon. And yeah, needing to like think of this part of my life, this is a lot different than it was like before I had kids, or someone coming back from a long-standing chronic injury that they were battling IT band syndrome, or proximal hamstring tendinopathy for many years, and their running is going to look a lot different when they get back in. So just having that like reset sounds like is a healthy thing, and reframing the mindset of like, hey, this season is my goal is to actually run without pain for the first time, or my goal is to actually do a new adventure and run with a little curiosity, right? And maybe get into the trails if you've never done trail running before. So I love that. Yeah. And from the coaches and researchers that you have talked to, what does some of the science actually say about training needs that do change after 40? I know you mentioned testosterone, particularly women don't have it as much, and men, those levels will decline. But you know what are some of those things that will need to change after 40, or where do like most training plans get it wrong for masters runners that you've seen?
Yeah, strength training becomes more important from a protective standpoint. We get weaker as we get older, and this is a way to help with that. Bone density declines, and heavy movements help to protect against that. And then the other piece is thinking that you can use the same training plan that you used 20 years ago, right? If you were a high mileage runner in your 20s and 30s, maybe you should reduce it by a little bit in your 40s and 50s. And if you were running 60 miles a week in your 40s, maybe you should consider 50 miles a week in your 50s. And so we see the value of cross training. Riding the bike is super low impact, and you can pile on the hours on the bike with pretty minimal impact from a like performance degradation standpoint, or like physical composition standpoint, or like durability. And as long as you're doing at least zone 2, you can really pile on the volume as long as and not see a downside really, as long as you're still doing the work. I was listening to David and Megan talk about this on their podcast this morning, and the piece with so like somebody wrote in and they were like, can I run 2 workouts a week and bike 5 days a week and expect to continue to progress? And they're like, no, because the ligaments and tendons need the loading on a regular basis. So like if you have performance goals, you should still be aiming to run, 3 or 4 times a week at a bare minimum, or split that up even more and aim for 4 or 5 and just do less time per and supplement that with biking. But the tendons and the ligaments need that loading on a consistent basis. um, I put all my training data, all my blood data into Claude, and I said, analyze this and tell me what's interesting. And so I have training data from Strava back to 2014, so like 3,500 runs. I have my training log with David since 2018, and I have blood work since 2014. And one of the pieces that it flagged was an injury pattern that occurred 8 times for me, where I would go from running 50 to 60 miles a week. I'd travel and run. The example it gave constantly was like 18 miles that next week. And then I'd jump back into full training with no on ramp again. And it flagged the pattern related to tendon issues, specifically like TFL and hip flexor. And I would complain about TFL and hip flexor with that pattern 8 times. And so I was talking to my friend Jason, who hosts the Strength Running podcast, who I think you
Oh
know.
yeah.
And he was like, that's not enough time to like deload fitness. Like you're not losing fitness from backing off training for a week. But again, the tendons and the, I don't know if elasticity is the right word to use, but and you know this better than I do as a PT, but his point was like I should consider on days that I can't run while traveling, like 10 minutes of plyometrics or jumping or movement or walking or something that's mobile and active versus like just like doing travel, even if it's like in an airport and just looking like an idiot for 10 minutes kind of a thing. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that, like, and specifically like these like that variability like that in a training program.
Yeah, well, I think the first point that you mentioned, in terms of like running frequency, I think that's like biggest misconception I hear all the time from runners is like, I can't run, back to back days. I need to run every other day because it's bad for my knees or bad for my hips. And yeah, I do find that runners stay healthier, they do better by increasing the frequency. So, like you said, like total minimum dosage is like 3 times a week. I've had runners who say, like, hey, I just want to run like twice a week. Can I do that? And bike, 4 to 6 times a week, whatever. And like you said, we need the loading. We actually, our bodies adapt, and our bodies are amazing things that they can adapt, right? So you can run 50 miles, 100 miles, right? Like do some crazy long distances. The human body is like amazing what it can do to adapt, but we do need to have those repetitive stresses on it in order for it to adapt in a progressive fashion. So that was the first point that I really totally agreed with you on there. And then the other thing that I thought about as you were speaking there, when you talked about kind of muscle loss, like when we get older, above 40, I also thought about like blood flow changes to tendons, and tendon elasticity isn't what it was in our 20s. And that is usually the biggest reason why runners who are not strength training, not doing specific loading exercises for their tendons, not training plyometrically and doing some jump training to actually stiffen up our tendons and make them more resilient, wind up getting Achilles tendon pain or hamstring tendon pain, right? Like all the tendons need a little bit more love in our 40s and above. And yeah, to go to like your scenario with the dramatic changes in training, I think there's definitely something to be said to that. And the other thing could be like, even, and you would maybe even know this better than I, in terms of like hormonal changes, like going that drastic from the consistent training you're doing, and then having like such a big deload week, and then right the next week going back into that aggressive training. I would imagine just, cortisol and stress hormone, I would imagine that would probably shift in such a dramatic, way. Whereas, yeah, it is important to have, down weeks in training. It sounds like yours was a little bit more drastic. And I don't know what, if your sleep is better when you're traveling or it's not as good when you're traveling. So, possibly that's a variable. But yeah, Jason's point about adding in some kind of like what we call like movement snacks, or, just some short kind of, burst of exercises to whether, load tendons, activate muscles, add some forces, and, do some plyometrics. I think there's some probably something to be said about that. And that might be helpful. Or, most of my athletes when they're training, I'll give them like minimum, 15 or 20 minutes of like, hey, let's do these couple exercises to kind of like maintain strength in your body, even if you can't run as much as we would like. And then just being really mindful on that, next week, I think is probably like the important thing. And I'm sure that you've learned probably just from your experiences is like maybe not jump right back into exactly where you were that week before, add a little bit more of an on ramp. And, I think that is more important as we are in our 40s and 50s than having those like dramatic, shifts in training.
Yeah, totally agree. I can't speak to the hormonal changes, but that's an interesting exploration of like your body's so used to the variability, and what happens when it stops with the variability. The other piece is like travel is stressful, and I did a whole podcast with a guy named Andrew Her of Fly Kit, a company that makes this product that alleviates the stress of travel. Both so his point was like the majority of people when they fly, they go from sea level to pressurized cabin at 8,000 feet in like 30 seconds to a minute, and that creates inflammation in the body. And here in Boulder or Denver, Colorado, whatever, we have the luxury of going from 5,000 to 8,000 feet, so it's like slightly less impactful. Because we're only going 3,000 feet. But a traditional airplane is pressurized to 8,000 feet, and so that's a dramatic change that our body is like has not adapted to, and so there's some influence as it relates to that. And so like it's about omegas and electrolytes and a variety of sugar capsule and a variety of different things that like influence or are influenced by the act of traveling itself and alleviating the damage that occurs that goes beyond just jet lag. So that's something that I've also like I've used that product a few times, but I've also just like brought my own omega-3 supplement and electrolytes on the plane with me, and sometimes like a tart cherry product. And I don't know, maybe that works too, maybe that helps, but it's something that I've incorporated into my travel routine following that conversation as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't heard that before with travel, but it makes sense. And yeah, having that dramatic swing. Yeah, it's definitely going to caused me to think a little bit differently about preparing for travel. Before we go any further, if you've been feeling stuck, frustrated with nagging injuries, or even starting to wonder if your best running is behind you, I want you to hear this. This is a real runner who was in the exact place and what happened when they followed a structured plan with the right support. Take a listen.
Hi, I'm Gigi and I live in Los Angeles, California. And thanks to Coach Dwayne and the Healthy Runner community, last month I completed the New York City Marathon. Coach Dwayne was exactly what I was looking for after I had knee surgery last year. Not only is he a doctor of physical therapy, which helped me immensely, but he's also a certified running coach and a runner himself. His advice was spot on. From the little things, which can be the big things, like what shoes to wear and how to warm up properly, to fueling, which was a huge issue for me. I completed the marathon feeling strong. I never hit a wall. What wall? There was none. All of his advice was right on, and I highly recommend him.
I truly hope that story inspired you and showed you what's actually possible. If you're looking for that level of structure, accountability, and support, you can check out the behind the scenes tour of our one-to-one coaching program. Just click the link in the description or scan the QR code. And if one-on-one coaching isn't the right fit right now, but you still want a proven system with guidance and an awesome community, check out the Healthy Runner Academy to help you run stronger, feel confident, and stay injury free. As we kind of shift gears a little bit to like specific injuries, and it is like the number one thing that derails most masters runners. And based upon like what you've heard from the best like athletes, coaches in the world here, what separates the runners who stay healthy for decades from those who keep breaking down?
It's fueling. The people who so I look at like and I meant to ask Sarah when I did a podcast with her, but you look at like the Stanford or BYU or some of these programs that were really successful in the 2000s and 2010s and have athletes. Like if you look at the runners that Sarah Hall was training with at Stanford, like a handful of them are still running competitively. And so look at the people that are doing it for decades. And well, I guess this is your question. What are the people that have been doing it for decades? Like what are the commonalities of these types of people? And again, my experience with these people is they're eating enough, they're surrounding themselves with meaningful relationships, and they sleep. And they're doing the things that allow them to stay healthy because the best way to be the best version of yourself as a runner is to just not get injured. And it's not about hero workouts, once a year or twice a year. It's about being 80%, 100% of the time versus 90 to 100%, 20% of the time. I'll take the B plus runner who can maintain a B plus over the course of the year over someone who burns hot and then burns out. That person who burns hot might, win a race or PR for 1 year period, but they're not going to be able to perform like that for a decade. And so, yeah, it's really just like how do you bulletproof yourself or um, create a more robust body? I've been consulting for a company called Eternal. Eternal does high performance healthcare for athletes. So it's marrying health and performance. And fundamentally, what Eternal does is help people do the common uncommonly well. So there's a performance assessment. You do movement, strength, stability. You do all these assessments to understand balance or imbalance or strengths and weaknesses and power. You do a DEXA scan, you do a VO2 max and a lactate threshold test, and separately you do blood work. And so it's really trendy right now to do all these like really crazy tests and interventions and peptides and all this stuff. And it keeps coming back to do the common uncommonly well. If you can do the common uncommonly well, you can be excellent for decades. And so people come to Eternal because they're like, I either need someone to be the quarterback for my health and performance, or I just want to do this thing for decades to come. And so we can absorb the blood data, we can absorb all these different things and give that guidance. But fundamentally, the ability to say your left glute is weak, that will become an injury. Here's what to do about it. Or your iron is low. So no matter what you do, you're going to feel bad unless you fix this. And here's how to fix it. So it's, I guess, really to answer your question more directly, like do the common uncommonly well, and you'll be able to do the thing that you like to do for a long time. And that's that philosophy of Eternal, which is if you want to be a lifelong athlete, you need to be a robust and strong and durable athlete versus chasing the 1%. So it's like it's all about the 99% and not about the 1%. But running Instagram is often focused on the 1% because it's sexy. It captures clicks But just saying like eat well, move well, sleep well, recover well, like that's boring. But that's the secret. Like boring is great.
Yeah, it's becoming a master at the basics, right? And I love how you highlighted that because that's like one of our core pillars of the podcast, and within our coaching program is just making yourself a master at making sure you're balancing strength training with running, with nutrition, with recovery, right? And having the proper mindset, and then executing, if you are running races, then executing like a smart race strategy. Those are kind of the six elements. And yeah, not being fooled by the cool, trendy, sexy thing, and being strong
Right.
and durable. Like we need to make that like sexy again, and that's something even in my personal journey. With kind of going down, I'm kind of fairly, I guess, novice to the marathon distance itself, and really training for it for 3 or 4 years now, where that's my focus, as opposed to half marathons. And every marathon isn't a PR for me, and it's not a loss at all. Like I just ran the Disney Dopey Challenge this past year after running Philly, and that the time wasn't as fast, but I felt like strong and durable, and I didn't feel wrecked after, and I was healthy, and like that brought me so much joy just to have that feeling during the race and be able to continue to get in my mental clearing miles like on a daily basis. And I think that's what so many people miss when they do succumb to an injury, because they get down some rabbit hole of like, hey, I'm going to do this AI training plan because it says it's going to give me a 3:20 marathon time, and and they focus in that, or just focus on the latest super shoe that's out there that's going to help improve their time by 2 or 3%. But I think you highlighted really well, based upon all of the experts that you have interviewed and the athletes you've talked to, is just mastering those basics. And that sleep one is the hardest for most of us who are juggling full-time jobs, family, all those things, and still trying to be really good at running. And if we have performance goals, we like to challenge ourselves, and it's hard because a lot of people do compare ourselves to the pros and the elites, and but they are like doubling down, like you said, on the sleep, recovery, nutrition, fueling, which a lot of us aren't. And if you're like working as a shift worker, doing 12 hours, you're a nurse or you're a surgeon, you're on call hours, you're like up in the middle of the night, like it's really hard to get in all of that nutrition. And obviously the sleep isn't where it should be. So thank you for reinforcing the even though it might not be the sexiest thing, and it might be not the trendiest thing that John just shared with you guys, it is going to be the difference maker if you actually want longevity in your running journeys. So thank you for highlighting that. And if a runner in their 40s or 50s is listening right now, they love running, they want to keep going for the next 20, 30 years even, like what's the single most important thing you tell them to start focusing on today?
You got to know your why. Everything else becomes easier. It's easier to be diligent about the prehab and the rehab and the PT, because you want to stay doing the thing. It's easier to do the long runs. And so exploring that and understanding, like, why do you want to run in your 40s and 50s and 60s? Um, Everything else becomes a whole lot more clear from there, because the motivation changes, right? So like when I put a race on the calendar, when I have it was easier to go run, the 5K effort today, because there was a purpose behind it. It wasn't just like go out and run hard for 19 minutes kind of a thing. Having some kind of emphasis behind why we're doing the thing and understanding really shifts the mindset, and then the physical piece follows.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, getting back to that why. So, guys, let's like bring it on home here. Today, Jon shared with us like what he's learned from hundreds of conversations with the world's best athletes, coaches, researchers about what it actually takes to run well, not just for this season, but for life. And I want you to hold on to a few things from today. Like, number one, sustainable excellence is not about running less, it's about like running smarter. And number two, that I heard is that runners who stay healthy keep going strong into their 50s, 60s, are not like so special, right? They've just learned to listen to their bodies and train accordingly. And yeah, number three, like it's never too late to actually become the runner that you want to actually be. So if a lot of the things that Jon talked about today, you haven't been doing, like it's not too late to start, right? We can teach old dog new tricks, right? Can you guys like relate to any of this that Jon shared today? Because I know I certainly can. And if there was a specific moment in this conversation that really hit home for you, I would love for you to drop it in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, because that helps me know exactly like what to help create for you next. But yeah, Jon, this has been a fantastic conversation. You shared a lot of wisdom with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. Where can our running community really learn more about all the great things that you're doing for the running community as a whole?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at JW Levitt. I write on Substack at longrunlabs.substack.com about the business of the outdoor industry. And my podcast is For the Long Run, all about exploring the why. I also have a second podcast, Long Run Labs, that is, as mentioned, all about the business of the outdoor industry and the stories of people building in the outdoor industry. And then I love LinkedIn, so connect with me on LinkedIn too. It's I think my favorite form of social media besides Strava. Um, but yeah, appreciate you having me on. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah, and I'll certainly put all those links in the show notes. Yeah, this was a great conversation, Jon. Like, keep doing what you're doing. The running community is better because of the conversations that you are actually creating. So now, guys, if you're walking away from today's conversation fired up, like ready to take your running to the next level, but you're still dealing with that nagging injury that keeps getting in the way, I shared with you today like what sustainable excellence looks like from a big picture, but you're going to want to queue up episode 278 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where I break down the real injury prevention system that's helped hundreds of runners stay healthy, consistent, and strong so you can train smarter, run longer, and finally stop guessing using my 5-step system that actually works. So just click the video that I have for you next, and let's keep you on the road to pain-free, lifelong running. As always, let's continue to grow a strong mind, a strong body, and just keep running. Until next time.